What's up, everybody? Dan here with an interview with another fantastic comic creator. This time I am talking to the fantastic, prolific comic writer, Jim Zub, joining me all the way from the Great White North.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. I mean, I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with me.
No worries. Yeah, it's such a joy to be able to do this, as a career, and it's always nice when people want to chat about it, how things are going, and what I've been doing. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts about doing the podcast is we got all the different shows we do on here, but whenever I'm able to set up an interview and talk with a comic creator whose stuff, that I've bought and enjoyed, it's always a pretty big thrill for me.
Well, I see you got the Conan stuff in the back there, so I assume you're keeping up with the current books.
Yeah, I always try to, whoever I interview, put a couple of their books behind me. I got Thunderbolts and
wonderful
Avengers and Conan. So.
Awesome, man. I love to see it. So thank you for the support. Makes
cool.
all the difference.
Yeah. So, I'll just start off with what initially got you interested in comics with, were you a kid,
right.
Or a teenager?
Yeah, I was, my older brother, he's 4 years older than me. He was my kind of proto nerd. He got me into all things, comic books and, role-playing games and video games and just anything kind of nerdy in that way. And so we started collecting comic books. Oh man. I mean, of course you read them in the newspaper and whatever, cartoons, things like that, but actually like collecting comics, I think I was around 7 or 8 years old when there was a used bookstore that had a bunch of comics in the back, and we would buy them. There was a flea market near our cottage that we would go to during the summertime. We would buy them there. But the first series I started collecting, like seriously, was probably G.I. Joe, the toys.
The Marvel one, yeah.
Cartoon. So it was one of the earlier issues. I couldn't tell you the exact one, probably 6 or 7 around there. Issue 6 or 7, I started collecting it. I might have, I think my cousins had some of them, and I started digging into them because of the cartoon and things like that. But then the superhero front, I knew Spider-Man, obviously. I knew him from the cartoon, and I knew the Electric Company magazine, and they had like Spidey super stories, all that kind of stuff. And there was one time we went to the used bookstore, and there was this particular cover that just jumped out at me. It was a cool looking Spider-Man cover, and I bought it with my own money, and I started collecting soon after. So that would have been, I think my first issue of Amazing Spider-Man that I bought was issue 230, 231. And then I collected it all the way through for a couple hundred issues. I was really obsessed with Spider-Man. And through that, it kind of unlocked the Marvel universe for my brother and I. We were really, really into it.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like me. I started reading when I was a little kid, and it was like my parents would drag me to antique stores and stuff like that. I'd be bored, and there'd be boxes of comics there, and I'd dig through them and just like, oh, this cover looks cool, that looks cool. And same thing, Spider-Man, G.I. Joe.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then for us, I think a big kind of piece of the puzzle was the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. When that came out, because you couldn't afford the early back issues with the first appearances and the origins of the characters, and there weren't really trade paperbacks. Eventually there would be, but not when we started off. And so that, for lack of a better term, encyclopedia really unlocked the Marvel Universe. It explained all the interconnections between the characters and their history. And because it was written in that kind of encyclopedic format, it felt like the gospel truth. It was just, this is how the Marvel Universe functions. These are the schematics of Avengers Mansion. This is how, these are all the different arrows that Hawkeye has at his disposal, or just like whatever. We obsessed over that stuff, and we read it and we studied it, and we wanted to just get that complete picture of this incredible interconnected world. And even though those stories were originally made by hundreds of different creators in that format, along with collecting the monthly issues, it made it feel like this cohesive, amazing tapestry that the Marvel Universe was ever growing and ever interlocking, and had this incredible, complicated history that we could just kind of dive into. And I feel like there's an age when kids, they're trying to understand their world. They're trying to like define the rules and what may have you. And some people obsess over sports, and some people obsess over whatever, Pokemon or computers or, anything like that. And you just find them at that right particular time, and it just like engages something really, really powerful. And so for us, that's what the Handbook of the Marvel Universe and eventually Dungeons and Dragons kind of did for us. It was those two kind of things in parallel. It was superhero comics, and then it was, oh man, with a game like Dungeons and Dragons, we can make our own stories, we can make our own heroes and go on these adventures. And between those two kind of mixing together, it just showed me this, creative world and these creative possibilities that I would, had no way of knowing would become my career. But it really, the die was cast pretty early.
So at what point, you said you didn't know it would become a career. Like I think,
Yeah.
every little kid, when they were a kid and you ask them what they want to do, it's like, I want to be a race car driver. I want to
Sure.
baseball. I want to draw comics. At what point did you decide that you wanted to be a comic writer?
It was weird because I did not think it would ever be something I could do. I liked comics. I liked the idea of creating my own stories. But for me, I think it was because inadvertently in those Marvel comics, they would talk about, the bullpen. They would talk about Manhattan. Both DC Comics and Marvel were there, and it felt like you had to either live in New York City or you had to be like brilliant and British in order to do comics. That was in the mainstream kind of space. And there were indie books, and I saw everything from whatever Cerebus or Captain Canuck or like all these other kind of books that were out there, but that still didn't feel like a viable vocation for me. And so I had other nerdy habits. I actually started as an artist rather than a writer. I loved the storytelling part of it, but I thought I was going to grow up to be like a Disney animator. Like I was going to go work at either Florida or California on Disney, hopefully feature films and things like that. So after I finished high school, I applied there's a program just outside Toronto that was teaching classical hand-drawn style animation. And some of those grads were going on to work at Disney or eventually pioneering some of the digital effects for ILM and things like that. And so I thought, okay, there's no way I will be one of whatever, one or two or three people whose name is on the cover of a comic book. That is impossible.
Yeah.
But I could be one of hundreds of names that scroll by on the end credits of an animated film. That seemed like a very still creative, still nerdy, but a more reasonable dream, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something that I would be able to do, and I could be a part of a creative team and build something. And I would see those making of specials for like the Disney movies, and those people seemed really happy and excited and creative and collaborative. And it's like, okay, I want to do that kind of thing. I want to be a part of one of those kind of that kind of environment. And so I put all my chips on animation at first and would eventually work in animation. I did some TV animation stuff here in the Canadian market. I worked for several different studios. I did a lot of freelancing. And the time that I got into it, just the nature of the thing, it was all transforming. The digital technology was really taking hold. The 3D animation stuff was really coming in a big way. And it looked like 2D classical animation was headed out the door. And so by the time I graduated, like by the time I left school and started to work, I was sort of a dinosaur in my own time. I wasn't up on that 3D technology. And I was like, oh man, I'm going to have to go to school and retrain or something like that. And then just luck of the draw, I was coming back to Toronto originally to go back to school. And a friend of mine who I'd worked with, who I knew in school, and we'd done some animation work together, he was working at a studio called Udon. And the Udon studio done all sorts of comic book stuff, but they were doing all kinds of different freelance artwork, everything from storyboards and toy design and advertising artwork and concept art and things like that. But they also had a contract at Marvel. They were doing some coloring and they were doing artwork for different series. I think at the time when I joined them, they were wrapping up a run on, they had a book called Agent X and another one called Sentinel that they were doing. They were coloring Uncanny X-Men. Yeah. And so my buddy introduced me around the studio, and luckily that summer they had gotten some extra coloring work. So my first professional comic credit is not as a writer, it's as a colorist. What I end up working on is just so ironic considering where I'm at now. My first professional comic credit is as a colorist recoloring reprints of Conan the Barbarian that Dark Horse was putting out. And they wanted to give it like a fresh coat of paint with that modern kind of coloring style. And nowadays I'm more about I would like it to look like the original kind of archival stuff. But at the time, it was like, hey, this is a summer job. I get to color comics professionally while I'm looking at going back to school that fall. And so that summer kind of unlocked the idea of, okay, like you could be working in comics. At the same time, I had just finished doing a web comic. When I was working at the animation studio, I wanted to make my own stuff in the evenings. And I noticed there were these people online who were posting their own comic strips. They were just putting a website up, no bar to entry, no publishing, no paper, no distribution. They just put stuff online. And so I was kind of also obsessed with that, sort of circumventing that, the traditional publishing industry. And so those two kinds of threads came together. I learned a ton about the business, and I slowly got myself into the comic business and moved away from animation. And the more that I did, the more I loved interfacing with the artists and building stories, the more I realized that the writing end of it is actually what I'm most excited about. Like, I like to draw, and I have that professional art experience, and I think it makes me a better writer because I know what I'm asking someone to do.
Yeah.
But finding the right artist for the job and being able to collaborate with them is genuinely one of the best parts of the job. So, yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, and I saw that some of the, I guess, at least from what I found, the first books you were credited as for a writer were Street Fighter comics, and and I saw
at the Udon studio. Yeah. What happened is that the studio was doing a bunch of different, what we kind of call custom projects. Sometimes they were making comics for clients. They were doing ad comics and things like that. Usually they would bring their own story, but every so often the client would come and they would say, hey man, we want you to make this thing. Do you have a writer on staff? And there was one guy on staff, Ken, who was writing, but if he wasn't available, I would always jump in. I would be like, yeah, I would love to write that. Sure, I will do that for you. And so it was just a good way for me to kind of get my feet wet and understand how that stuff worked, get those first few credits. And then by the time we went through the 2000s, I got that itch more and more and more that I wanted to make my own stuff again. It wasn't just about, okay, let's execute other people's projects. And so by 2009, I was developing, I had done a couple anthology stories for an anthology called Pop Gun that Image had put out. And Eric Larson was publisher at Image at that point, and he really liked the story that this guy, Chris Stevens, and I did. And we would eventually roll that over, work with another artist named Edwin Huang, and then launch that as Skullkickers in 2010. And that is kind of transformative to me because that's when I moved from like, oh, people start to see me as a writer for real because I'm putting out a regular, almost monthly book from that point on. And we did 34 issues of Skullkickers, and that regularity, I learned so much about the business. I got to put out a book that I was really proud of. I got to put that into people's hands and prove my bona fides that I could tell a story and make something fun and entertaining and make it look as good as, a lot of other stuff that was coming out around that time or better. And that's when, bit by bit, I started to get asked to write for other people and then build my kind of body of work from there.
So was that the point when you realized that doing Skullkickers, where, like you said, it was about, a monthly book. It wasn't, kind of, a couple issues.
Yeah, it wasn't one-offs anymore. It wasn't just like a rare little thing. If you look at my output before 2010, and it's like onesies and twosies. I'm doing one-shots, or I'm doing little backup stories or an anthology here and there. I've got my own little web comic that I put together, but there's no sustained kind of there's no sustained output. I'm not putting out stuff on a regular basis. I'm not visible all the time. And then once Skullkickers hits, I've got that regular book coming out. You can see that effect on my career. And that doesn't mean it was, guaranteed to happen, but it definitely, it changes people's perception, and it gives me something new that's always coming out with my name on it. And once we've got the trade paperback, and once we keep building that series, like I said, we did 34 issues, it was out there. And then it was much, much easier for me to be visible and to get trials on other potential projects, to start pitching on things and putting that in the hands of editors and stuff like that.
Or was that the point doing that book where, like you said, it was, mostly monthly, where you realized, I can do this as a career, you know?
Yeah, I knew that I could put out professional quality work. Like making enough money at it, of course.
Yeah,
Is the other
that's kind of what I meant. Like,
side of the
I can do
equation.
this as
Yeah.
a job instead of
I
just.
could at that point it was like, okay, this is going to be either the most expensive hobby I've ever had, or it's going to be, something new in terms of a career, and slowly building up that work. At first, it was any project that I would get, I was essentially putting it into a war chest to make more comics. And I still had, the job at the studio. And then eventually I was teaching at a school here in Toronto. So I was teaching animation courses and art courses and storytelling courses. And that allowed me a lot of, it gave me a bedrock in terms of my finances so that I could take risks on myself for making more comics. And so within that 3 or 4 years, I could probably have quit my teaching job maybe as early as like 2015, 2016, when I was getting Marvel work for the first time and it was regular. But I held on for quite a while because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a flash in the pan. I wanted to make sure that I could, take on the kinds of projects that I knew I was going to be good at and that I could put my all into, and not be afraid that at any moment the whole thing was going to crumble underneath me. Because I've seen too many freelancers who they kind of explode into the comic market for a few years and they assume it's always going to be like that. And then eventually it all kind of, fades out. And I'm like, I've seen enough now. And I feel like I have enough experience now that not that I thought I would fail, but just I want to have that extra buffer, of stability to make sure I could pull it off.
Yeah. Yeah. That safety net of,
Yeah.
You're not, it's like, I'm not a kid, living in
Right.
in my parents' house. Like, I have real world bills to pay. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. And once I got married, I actually got married the same year I launched Skullkickers. And so that was like this bizarre transformative year where I've got this incredible creative output for the first time in a long time. And I've got this new responsibility. And it's like, oh, you're an adult now, buddy.
Yeah.
Like, you got to really make this thing. If you're doing this, you got to commit to it, but you've also got to be pragmatic and be, careful. And I feel like I know a lot of people who kind of romanticize a creative career. And I think that that's a wonderful thing, to have inspiration and to be driven, but it can turn, man, if you're not careful, and things completely out of your control. It's like, no one could have imagined we would have had whatever, the pandemic and lockdowns and, pencils down on a ton of those projects. And if I had been just fully all in on freelance and had no backup plan, I could have been in a real bad way. So, just stuff like that. It's been, I always try and encourage people to make stuff, and I encourage people to be creative and to put out their own work, but never to spend money that they don't have. Don't buy a ticket to a convention and go to San Diego or New York or something if you can't afford to lose that money and have no creative prospects come from it. Mm-hmm. Like, go there and have a great time and network and meet people, but don't do the Hail Mary play and think that that's suddenly, jump off the cliff and think that you're going to suddenly sprout wings or whatever.
Yeah. That's great advice. I know I've lost way more money in creative endeavors I've done in my life.
Sure. And there's nothing wrong with, like I said,
trade the experience.
Yeah. The most expensive hobby I've ever had. If all I made was Skullkickers and I put it out there, I'm really proud of it. I'm really glad I did it. It was a really fun thing. And it's a piece of me. Every creative project, every piece of art that you put out is a little time capsule of who you were at the moment that you made it. You know what I mean? And so I look at these books, like this shelf here behind me. This shelf here, this vertical one, is all books I've written, which is insane to say out loud. And I can pull any one of those off the shelf and I could tell you probably an anecdote about where I was when I was writing it, or a really cool experience I had working with the team on it, or somewhere I got to travel promoting it, or something like that. And that's what those represent to me. As much as they are commercial endeavors and you're trying to make money at it, they're little time capsules. They're really cool little memories, and risks and creative ideas and things all kind of converging together for me.
So in you talk about Skullkickers, and then in 2014 you launched Wayward, which
Mhm.
was, another kind of long running independent series
Yeah.
created. What did you learn from doing Skullkickers, where it's like, hey, this is the first time you're doing a comic and putting out monthly?
Sure.
What did you learn from that you were able to then apply to Wayward when you
I mean,
started?
it was everything. So Skullkickers barely made any money like the entire time it ran. It was always on the edge of disaster financially and sales wise, but it was good for visibility. And
Mhm.
it was a learning experience all the way through. The lucky part was after Skullkickers launched, The Walking Dead had come out and it was the biggest show on television. And so everyone was looking at new image titles coming out and said, what's the next Walking Dead? What's the next big
Yeah.
deal? So that's when you have Morning Glories and Chew and eventually Saga and all these other books. But we were right in the thick of that. And what that meant is when we launched in 2014, we got to ride that kind of wave of, well, what if this is the next hot image book? Well, what if this is the exciting thing? And it made that book A, profitable right from the hop, and B, it gave us a lot of momentum to try stuff out and to really put that book out into all kinds of places. And so that's how we were able to do 30 issues of that series. And it was really solid all the way through, sales wise and visibility wise. And even at the very end, when the monthly sales were finally dipping to a level where you're like, okay, the individual issues aren't as profitable. You had foreign editions, you had trade paperbacks, you eventually had the deluxe hardcovers. Like it became its own little publishing thing. And, I could look at something like that and go, okay, we were, I don't know how you'd measure us, like a mid-list image book. And then I would look at something like whatever, The Wicked and the Divine or Saga, and I would just be like, oh my God, like if I'm doing pretty well with this book, those guys are through the stratosphere. Like it's just crazy how well that thing can do when you bet on yourself and then it actually works, Brett Bean, the guy who put out that new series called Dork that just came out a few weeks ago.
Yeah. So it's like the hottest thing right now.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine, and I was so excited. I read that book months ago, and I thought it was really cute and fun. But no way would I have anticipated it's going to be this hot, explosive book. I'm so proud of him, and I'm so happy for him. And I know the kind of things that can ripple out of that sort of success, that kind of a hot image launch, it can transform your career. And so to see that happening to a friend of mine in real time and to have such good memories of it happening to us in a similar kind of fashion, like over a decade ago, it's cool. It's nice to sort of know that can still happen. I've got another creator-owned book that I'm looking at launching either end of this year or early next year. No one knows what the market's going to be like and whether or not it'll be the new hot thing or what may have you, but we'll do everything in our power to get it into people's hands and get them excited about it and see if we can get some fires burning, So
nice.
Yeah.
Well, and then right after that, you went to doing a lot of stuff for Marvel. I saw that you had relaunched the Thunderbolts book.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like getting that gig? I got, when it's something like that, is it the creator going and doing a pitch like, hey, I want to do this, or is it Marvel saying, hey, this is what we want, you give us your pitch for it and we'll pick the one we like?
So getting work at Marvel and DC generally is a matter of editorial coming to you. They're not, you can't pitch them out of the blue. Legally they won't accept those pitches, and B, that's just not how this stuff works. What had happened was an amazing editor named Bill Roseman had reached out to me around 2014, might have been late 2013. And Disney had bought Marvel. They wanted to do some of these synergized projects. So they did this line of books called Disney Kingdoms. And so Bill contacted me, and it was funny because he contacted me because I had done Skullkickers and this book called Pathfinder, which were both fantasy books. And he said, oh, there's this Disney character, this purple dragon from the Epcot Center called Figment. So it's sort of magic-y stuff. I want a fantasy guy, and I think you're a fantasy guy. And he didn't know me. He just contacted me out of the blue. And I said, Bill, that character is a very specific thing from the Disney lore. I am the right fit for it, but not because it's high fantasy. It's because it's this whole other thing. And so I ended up doing that book with him, and it did surprisingly well. And that kind of got me in the door at Marvel. But Bill at that time was an editor on a division called Special Projects. And so it was sort of everything that wasn't the regular superhero continuity. So Marvel does all sorts of ad comics for different corporations. They do all sorts of promotional comics for kid stuff or other media that they're putting together. They even do a comic for the military that a lot of people don't know about. And so Bill started hiring me to do those kinds of projects because they were not that far afield from what I had done at Udon when we were making those kind of custom corporate comics. And so I already knew the marching orders. I knew the kind of format. I knew the sort of things that people wanted. I had done everything from coloring, lettering, art, and editorial over at Udon. So I was a really good fit. Wherever Bill kind of needed me, I was a good widget. I could just sort of fit in there. And eventually he offered me a book called Spider-Man Magazine. So they don't have it in North America, but in England, they had this thing called Spider-Man Magazine, came out every month. It was for little kids, and it was like mazes and games and little articles. And then in the middle, there was always a 10-page Spider-Man story, a brand new one, based on whatever was the most kind of current version of Spider-Man. So at the time, there was a cartoon called Web Warriors. And so that's what it was based on. And I lucked out that Bill asked me if I would write a few of these. I did. I had fun doing them. Got to write Spider-Man, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
And he said as long as a villain or a character showed up in that cartoon, I could use them in the comic. Well, I watched the cartoon and freaking everyone in the Marvel Universe showed up. It was like the X-Men are in some of them, and the Avengers, and tons of different villains. And so I started every single story I did. I put it together almost like Marvel team up. It was Spider-Man and one of these heroes. So it was like Spider-Man and Thor, Spider-Man and Captain America, Spider-Man and Blade in one of them. It was just as many different heroes and villains as I could stuff into these little 10-page stories to A, get to write those characters, and B, kind of show Bill that I could really come up with creative combinations. And he was really impressed. And so he was the one who approached me and said, I would love to develop a book in the main Marvel universe, with you to write. He was the editor when they relaunched Guardians of the Galaxy, the version that
the movie version
Lanning and Abnett did, right? The movie version. And so he had quite a bit of pull because Guardians was coming out and it was pretty hot. And so he's like, I want to do another team of misfits. And we were talking about building a new team book at Marvel. And then he got the opportunity of a lifetime. And he ended up getting asked if he would move to California to take over this new thing they were putting together called Marvel Games. And to this day, Bill's still the head of Marvel video games, all the Spider-Man games and everything that they put out that's video game related. Bill's the head of Marvel's end of that, part of the company. And so all of a sudden he wasn't going to be working in comics anymore. And he said, oh man, this pet project we're working on isn't going to go anywhere if I'm not heading it up. But I won't leave you hanging. I'll help you out. And so he introduced me to Tom Brevoort, who was the head of the Avengers group, and put in a really good word for me, to the point where Tom reached out to me and said, look, Bill doesn't normally talk about people so, effusively. And I want to try and find somewhere for you here. And he was the one who asked me to pitch on Thunderbolts. They were doing a bunch of different stuff at that time, and Thunderbolts was on deck to be relaunched in and around that event they were doing called Secret Empire. And he asked if I would be interested. And so I put together a pitch based on a couple ingredients that they knew they were going to have in the book, but otherwise it was left pretty open to me to figure it out. And thankfully that was sort of started my monthly Marvel career. So that ends up launching 2015. And from there, man, Tom becomes the majority of my work at Marvel. He's lining me up for eventually stuff in the Avengers and Champions. And that carries through for years. And it really changes the way people see me and my work.
So when you did the pitch for Thunderbolts, you said they had some kind of ideas about it, like how much, like for the like the cast of the book, how much of it was you getting to pick that
was them. So they said they wanted the original team, but they wanted, I think Nick Spencer, who was doing Secret Empire, suggested that Winter Soldier could lead up the team. And they knew they were going to have this, well, they weren't sure at the time. I think it was like a consciousness of a piece of the cosmic cube. And eventually it became a young girl, this little girl that they were trying to keep away from the government. And that was sort of at the heart of the whole story. They said, this is something we're going to tie in. And if you like it, lean into it. And if you don't, like, use these bits for a while to tie into the event, and then you can kind of eject them out. But I liked it, and I thought it could be a lot of fun. So I leaned right into it and really went to town on it. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a really cool experience, and getting to finally dig into the Marvel universe and be able to do stuff on a monthly basis that people were seeing and excited about, and try and find that balance point between the kind of cool action and also the emotional stuff that I love about Marvel superheroes was just a blast.
Yeah, and Thunderbolts, it's such a cool concept. I remember when the original book launched, and you're just thinking, you bought the issue of Hulk they were in, and then you bought the first issue. I'm like, oh, it's I like the writer.
You think you know what they're all about, and then it just blows your mind.
Yeah, and you turn to the last page, you're like, holy shit.
Yeah, it was an incredible. It's one of the tightest kind of superhero pitches of the modern era. Like Busiek, Bagley just did a phenomenal job on it. And I knew we weren't going to be able to do that kind of first issue twist, like that's a one-time deal. But I felt like if we could get back to that feeling of these, heroes, villains, like straddling that line morality-wise and trying to find themselves while they're on the run from the government, while Bucky's on the run from Cap, who is actually, now part of Hydra and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. I knew there was lots of cool stuff we could mine there in terms of potential. And it was a lot of fun. I did 12 issues on that. The last issue of the run was a tie-in for the anniversary of the very first Thunderbolts. And we got Kurt and Mark back to do a backup story. That was really surreal and cool. Yeah, just there were a couple cons I went to where a bunch of different creative teams who had worked on Thunderbolts over the year, obviously Kurt Busiek, but then there was like Charles Soule and Fabian Nicieza and like, just all kinds of different creators who I really respected. And we all kind of got to hang out at one point. We got a photo of all these guys together, Jeff Parker, and just like, it was so fun to be like, oh, you're part of this legacy of this thing. You're this part of this funky little team that's got this, these troublemakers, and you get to chart their next stage of their journey, which was just, it was just such a cool opportunity. From there, I end up doing Uncanny Avengers, which then becomes those
lineup of characters.
Yeah, it's just such a weird and wild lineup of characters, and trying to keep that soap opera rolling. And then that turned into, they were going to relaunch the Avengers book, but they wanted to end it with a bang. There were 3 different Avengers books. There was Mark Waid's Avengers. There was Al Ewing doing US Avengers, and I was doing Uncanny. And so we put together an event that eventually was released as a weekly series called Avengers No Surrender. Mm-hmm. That's actually going to be reprinted in an omnibus coming out in a month or so. And so we did No Surrender, and that came out right around the time of Infinity War. And it did so well that Tom immediately asked us to turn around and do another one. So we did a 10-parter called No Road Home that came out during Endgame. And so being like the co-writer of the Avengers during the Avengers are the biggest media property on earth, just like, it was mind-bending, on a slow news week here in Canada, like the Canadian news picked up on it, and they were like, oh, the writer of the Avengers is Canadian. And they just like lost their minds. And I was suddenly doing like CBC radio and national news programs and things like that. Like, it was wild. It was absolutely wild. Yeah.
That's cool. So I wanted to ask, what was it like doing this book where it's, coming out on a weekly basis, and it's so many creators, like you said.
Yeah, it was one of the wildest and most creative times of my life. Like, we had to build the whole thing 10 or 11 months in advance, because we knew once the book started releasing, obviously production, we had to basically be done.
Yeah.
And so we had 3 different art teams. We had 3 different writers. We had multiple editors, with Tom and Alana Smith were our sort of leads on that. And then we had just, the books were being produced out of order, because let's say like Pepe Larraz is doing issue 1 to 3. Well, issue 1 is being produced while issue 4 is being produced, while issue like 7 or 8 is being produced. And so 2 and 3 haven't been drawn, but 4 is being drawn based on what's going to happen in 3. Uh-huh. And so it was like this puzzle, this endless kind of interlocking puzzle of crazy, amazing things we had to put together, and reference material and plot points. And we decided, when we actually did an Avengers Summit in person at the Marvel office in New York, we decided we didn't want it to be like 52 or those other weekly books that DC had done,
Mm-hmm.
the way that they would do them, they would have one writer write kind of each issue, and then they would swap different writers for different issues. And we wanted it to feel like, because all three teams were going to be intermixing with each other, it didn't want to feel like, oh, Mark Waid clearly wrote this issue. Oh, Al Ewing clearly wrote this issue. We wanted it to feel really organic. So for better or for worse, we decided we were all going to work on every issue. So we were writing scene by scene, and I was sort of breaking down each issue. We made a big outline how it's all going to work, what was going to happen in all these 16 issues. And then with each one, we had like, okay, this scene is a 4-page scene and it's going to connect to this one. You turn the page and it's here. So Mark would write whatever one scene and I would write the next scene, and we would all be writing our own sections and then Frankenstein monstering them together and then tightening up the little transition points and making sure it was all consistent. And then editorial would go back through it, make sure we hadn't missed any characters, because there was like 20 Avengers in this story.
Oh yeah, there's a big cast.
And tons of villains. And so we had these funny moments where like, okay, Quicksilver's injured, right? Make sure the injury's in the same spot because different artists are drawing it at different times. Make sure the costumes are all consistent. Make sure all the locations make sense. And all those little things that you take for granted that in normal production would not be that big a deal. Here, it was like there were so many pitfalls if we weren't paying attention. It was a ton of fun. It was like nerve-wracking and exciting. It was just such a cool thing because we were putting together a script every 2 weeks when we were in the midst of production. So on most issues, I might have to write 6-7 pages per issue, but then, I've got to see how everyone else's stuff fits together and then kind of massage it all to make it work. And so we were on emails every day. We were on conference calls every week. And so you can't help but bond with those people because it's such a cool and collaborative space. And we're all throwing out cool ideas and trying to make our scenes as fun as possible. Al ended up pitching the concept for what will become the Immortal Hulk when we were in that conference room. And then watching that explode afterwards, and he takes over the Hulk, and everyone loves that run. And sort of being there for the genesis of that was just so cool. Yeah, it was just such a fun time. It was such an amazing project. And when it all started, I kind of was so nervous I was going to be the weakest link. And then by the end of it, I was like, oh, we're the Avengers. We did what the Avengers do. We come together as individuals to tackle something that we as individuals could never have defeated, and that it felt very real in that kind of a way.
So you mentioned the Immortal Hulk. So he, pitched that and made that kind of a central part of the story. Was
right.
Like you and Mark Waid, did you have, any input for what kind of was going to go into Immortal Hulk, or was it all
not the Immortal Hulk piece per se? Like that was, Al really had a tight vision for that, to the point where we had dinner the night before the big Avengers Summit conference. And Al started throwing some of those ideas out to us, or saying he had this big plan for the big green guy. And we said, we'll try and tee you up. Like, you never know what's going to happen in that room and whether or not they've already got plans for the Hulk. Mm-hmm. But if they don't, like, let's, put some pepper behind it and really see if we can make this thing happen. And a similar kind of thing happened to me when we did the second event, when we did No Road Home. It was neat because now almost a year later, we were going out for another summit, and now we were the team that did it. We did No Surrender, and it worked. Yeah. And so we were out for dinner, and I said, hey, I've got this really weird idea. I've got this concept for this sort of meta container, this narrative idea for the Marvel Universe, this universal thing called the House of Ideas. And Al really liked it and thought it was crazy cosmic. And Mark was like, I wonder if we can make it work in our Avenger story. And midway through that summit the next day, we were all throwing crazy ideas into the pot, just weird, funky stuff. And the timing couldn't have been better. CB Cebulski was there. And at one point he goes, this is all cool. And there's all sorts of fun stuff here. But what's it leading to? What is the point of this whole thing? And Mark just looks over at me and he goes, Jim knows. And then I had to pitch the room. Like, okay, there's this meta cosmic container for all of the stories of the Marvel Universe and all this sort of stuff. And I was nervous as all hell. And I pitched it out. And then CB just nodded and goes, well, next year when this is coming out, it's the 80th anniversary of Marvel. That sounds like a really cool way to celebrate. I was like, I guess we're doing it, So those are the kind of moments that you're excited to be in the midst of it. You're excited to be able to contribute. And to this day, that whole team has a really cool bond because of those projects.
That's pretty cool too. Someone like Mark Waid, who has been written so much stuff for so long. When they say, what's going to happen, and he goes, "Oh well, he's going to let you know. He's running point on this." Like,
well, that's what's so fun. There were moments where, you know, when you're in the middle of production, you don't really think about it. Like before I did the first meeting with the team, I was like, oh my God, you know, Mark Waid, Kingdom Come, and Flash, and all these amazing runs, Captain America, and all this stuff. But then in the room, you're just brainstorming. You're just guys trying to come up with cool ideas, and you're just telling stories together. And sometimes butting heads not because you want to fight, but because you want the best stuff to win. Do you know what I mean? Like, if something doesn't quite make sense, you call someone on it and you're like, okay, how can we make this work? Or that's a cool idea, but it doesn't quite fit here. What if it fit over here? Like that was the trick, was figuring out how we could all get the best ideas on the page and put ourselves into it. And there was a moment we were working away on the second event, and I was talking about these crazy fight scenes. And Mark is like, honestly, I find writing fight scenes really tiring. And I said, oh, I love writing them. Like, I love the choreography and the interplay of the powers and all that stuff. And he goes, good news, you're getting all the big fight scenes. And he just like offloaded that onto me. And it was both like like a badge of honor. Like, okay, cool, man. Mark Waid thinks I can do this. And some of the best compliments were that people couldn't tell which parts were written by which of us, you know? Or they would look and they would say, oh, clearly the House of Ideas is an Al Ewing idea because he's always big and cosmic. And Al's always been cool in interviews, being like, no, that was Jim. Like, you know, and other stuff like that. It was just such a cool thing to be able to do, and a real milestone in my career at that time. Mm-hmm. And, you know, without trying to sound too hyperbolic, once you've done that, like after your name, they can credit you Avengers from now on, you know, and that's something very cool. And between those two miniseries, the 16 issues, the first one was a miniseries, like an event series, and the second one was 10. Like, I've written 26 issues of the Avengers. Like, that's pretty mind-bending. You know, I mean, I don't know how many people have written Avengers over the years, 30, like 40 people, maybe less, to be in that. Yeah, that fraternity, for lack of a better term, is a fun thing. So,
yeah, and you could go anywhere, and people that don't read comics, you could say, oh, I wrote this book or this character. Go, who? And you could say, I wrote Avengers. They go, oh.
Right. And that's the thing. You don't do it for that reason. Like, I'm not doing it to whatever, get that stamp on my thing. It's just the way it ended up working out. And I think one of the tough things, I try and explain this to people when they're starting their careers out. I know you have that character, or you have that idea, and it's the one thing you think is going to make your career. But like, I grew up reading Spider-Man and a lot of solo characters, and yet I kind of made my name at Marvel on team books because I got really good at doing the interplay between different characters and the dynamics of those different characters, Thunderbolts, Champions, Avengers, all that kind of stuff. But if you'd have asked me who I want to write, I would have said Spider-Man. I would have said whatever, Daredevil or something like that. And I've never done a solo superhero book at Marvel, like not like that. And that's really odd in some ways, because you know, one of my favorite characters is Spider-Man. Another favorite character is Doctor Strange or Blade, like supernatural monster hunters and magic stuff. And those are characters I know I could bring something really cool to, but that's not the way the opportunities spun out when I was doing stuff at Marvel. And so it's fascinating to sort of go, if I put all my chips on it and said, well, if I don't get to write, I don't know, Wolverine or something, I'll be unfulfilled. And you're like, that's not what it's about. It's about also looking at what are the current opportunities and how can you make the most of them and show people your skills in those, you know, projects.
Well, you mentioned Champions, where you took that over with, I think it was issue 19.
Yeah.
Right? And then you wrote it until they decided to
relaunched it, and then I did 10 more issues on the relaunch. Yeah.
So what was it like writing that, where it's a team full of it was essentially like Marvel's Teen Titans. You know,
it was, but it was interesting.
Characters that are kind of tied to older.
Yeah.
What was it like writing all the young characters compared to adult?
Right. Mark Waid had launched that series and had a lot of fun with it. And then I took it over from him. And Tom, our editor, was essentially like, don't feel beholden to do it exactly the way Mark did. Because if it is, then I would just keep Mark on the book. Like, you've got to be your own writer. And so I looked at the book and we talked about it. It's funny that you mentioned Teen Titans, because that's one of the things that Tom sort of mentioned as a waypoint, where he said, you know, the original Teen Titans book that Wolfman and Perez did, intense drama and intense action, and like, just because these are teen characters doesn't mean that they can't go up against bigger threats. Do you know what I mean? And so I was like, okay, I take that internally as well, because I used to love reading whatever New Mutants or the X-Men and like those books that have got the constant kind of dramatic turns. And one of the things that there was sort of this prevailing narrative that the young new characters were poor replacements for the old heroes, and that they were being treated with kid gloves, that they were bubble wrapped or whatever. And I said, well, we're not going to do that. Like, a Marvel superhero has feet of clay and they get pushed to their absolute limit. And that's how they show you that they're heroes. And so metaphorically, man, I like put their face in the dirt. Like, I made it really hard on them dramatically. And I did all sorts of really kind of difficult things for the book. And some of the fans, I think, were like, oh my God, Jim hates the champions. I was like, no. They're Marvel superheroes, man. Like, they can handle it. That's what makes them heroes, is we're going to show you, we're going to take stuff away from them and we're going to put them in a real low spot. And then you're going to watch them climb out. And that's where the heroism comes from. And some people dug it and other people didn't. But for me, I knew the plan and I knew why I was doing what I was doing, that these characters were as worthy as anyone else. And whether that's Miles Morales or Kamala Khan or, you know, Sam, or just any of the characters that were populating that book, and adding more of them, more teenage heroes into the mix as we went along.
And, you know, I saw, you know, you did it for a while. They canceled it just so they could relaunch it with a #1. And I saw something where you had said that they did that because it gives readers a new jumping on point. And that's something that seems really, I mean, it's very common nowadays.
It is. Yeah. At the time it was, though. One of the difficulties is C.B. Cebulski actually took over as editor-in-chief right like a month after I took over Champions. And so the prevailing wisdom under Axel Alonso, previous editor-in-chief, was just keep the numbering going. So that's why I took over with 19. And then a month later, CB comes in, and we got a little bit of buzz on my issues of Champions. And so then the talk was, man, this should have been a new #1. All right, we're going to make that happen. And it was sort of difficult to get into that narrative flow on it, because in order to make it a new #1, we had to do something big and crazy. And so I was trying to do long-term planning on that Champions book. I wanted to be on that book for years. And so I had plans down the line. Okay, eventually we're going to build up to this. We're going to build up to that. We're going to build up to this other thing. And Tom was like, if we don't do those big things now, we'll never get to them. And so we sort of hit the booster button on that new #1, and I threw a whole bunch of crazy ingredients into that new launch of the series. And it was like, it did feel like you hit the fast forward button. Like, people were like, holy crap, a whole bunch of stuff just changed. I hope you like it. And it was like, it was a wild ride all the way through to the finish of that second run on the series. And trying to remind people and excite people about those characters in a time when there were so many other titles that were getting those new #1s and the relaunches and everything else.
So what are your feelings on that? You know, I know you comic fans all have varying opinions on books, you know, like you mentioned Spider-Man or Daredevil, that, you know, are they're big time characters that, you know, one creative team will finish and then it'll launch with a #1 and it'll be on 6, 7, 8, 9.
I mean, the reality is I'm too damn pragmatic. I can see both sides of the argument. You know what I mean? Like, when I was a kid, I started reading Amazing Spider-Man in the 230s. You know, it didn't stop me from enjoying that book and discovering it. Yeah, me too. Wanting to go backwards and dig into back issue bins or read the official handbook of the Marvel Universe and understand all the ingredients that went into who Spider-Man was, and then keep reading going forward. But on the other hand, it's like, I know sales-wise why they do it, you know? Just today, there's talk that the new Daredevil #1 that's coming out has been insane orders, like just record-breaking, you know, orders. You won't get that on random issue number in the middle of the run. But on the other hand, how many times do you do that? And diminishing returns can be a possibility, and fatigue that comes from the readership, where if they're really enjoying something, oh, you just slam the reset button and it's like, well, do I stick around or do I leave? And if they're not enjoying it, well, that's definitely the eject button. Like, that's your time to get out. And so now I'm thankful I'm in a position where I'm doing Conan the Barbarian. We relaunched it in 2023 with Titan, and we're not resetting anytime soon. I'm signed on for 50 issues of the series. So I'll be on Conan through at least end of 2027. And that's the point. The point is that the Conan #1 that came out in 2023 is the Conan #1 that hopefully sticks around for as long as possible, that evergreen entry point stays there so people know, okay, this is a new era, the character at a new publisher. Of course you have a #1 there, but that's the ground floor. You'll always be able to enter the franchise on that spot. And if we do it right, build an amazing foundation, and people are always coming in and always building and always heading forward with us, with the character, So
I kind of look at it as, like you said, when I was a kid, I would just buy whatever random issues I found, and
we're not in that market anymore. So I don't want to just look at it with nostalgia goggles and be like, well, it wasn't like that when I was a kid, therefore they shouldn't do it. It's like, no, it's a different market, it's a different world, but there is such thing as too much of a good thing, and there is too many #1s, to the point where it just feels insanely oversaturated, and it loses what makes it special. You know what I mean? That if there's 30, 40 new #1s coming out every month, how can any of them be special? How can any of them stand out in that insane market? And then doing it with these popular characters, because that's a way for you to have 100 variant covers and all these other things. It's like, I don't know if the market will continue to bear that infinitely, or if it will run its course. It's hard to know. If I knew that, I would have a crystal ball, and I would probably be much richer than I am today.
Yeah. And, that said, it's a good jumping on point, but the flip side of it too, it's also a good jumping off point if someone says, you know what, it's ending, so
it's a difficult thing. It's difficult for retailers, it's difficult for publishers. Everyone's trying to put out the best work they can. Everyone's trying to get as many eyeballs on that work as they can. And one of the ways you can do that is putting that #1 on the cover. The trick is, of course, in a world like the Marvel Universe or the DC Universe, that balance point of, is this actually new reader friendly? And does it also feel like it's continuing the story of those characters onward from previous tales? How do you balance those two extremes, right? Where you want to both bring new readers in the door and say, start right here, and at the same time also say, don't worry, all the stuff that happened in those previous adventures, it mattered, it's worthy, it will be referenced in some way, shape, or form. And it can be a tightrope to walk those things, narratively speaking and creatively speaking.
Yeah, and you'll get them for issue 1, but then you got to tell a good enough story that they're willing to come back and buy issue 2. I remember hearing this radio DJ saying something once years ago where he said, anybody could come in for like a talk show who thinks that they can do this. Anybody can come in and do a 4-hour show on Monday and say, oh, I'm going to do this and this and it's going to be a great show. And he goes, yeah, what are you going to do on Thursday?
You got it. Well, I think that's like writing as well. I'll talk to people and they'll say they've got a cool idea either for existing characters or for their own story. And it's like, that's great. Ideas are wonderful and they can lead to all sorts of amazing things. But your job is not just to create one thing. You know what I mean? Your job is to be able to not just come up with new ideas, but to take existing material and ideate on them, be able to brainstorm new things and cool ideas and alternative takes and new perspectives. When someone contacts me, for a project and they say, does this property interest you? I got to do research and try and really internalize, even if it's something I know, even if it's something like when I've done Dungeons and Dragons or Samurai Jack or Rick and Morty or stuff like that. Like, I'm a fan of those things. And so I can dig in and watch my favorite episodes, but then it's about getting those gears turning, like, okay, what do I know about this property? What do I like about this property? What hasn't been quite done before with this property, but doesn't feel so far painted outside the lines that people wouldn't believe it's happening,
Yeah.
you know? And that's the more you do it, the better hopefully you get at it. And the easier it is for you to understand when you're in a good flow, coming up with those ideas and bouncing those ideas off of your collaborators.
So you had mentioned Conan. So
Yeah.
ironic that, you know, that's how you started recoloring Conan stuff. But then
Yeah, it's such a weird way of going about.
So you wrote some Conan stuff with Marvel, and then, you know,
my first Conan story is actually at Dark Horse. So Gail Simone is a good friend of mine, and I'd met her through Udon and things like that. She'd done some work with the studio over the years, and she was writing Red Sonja over at Dynamite. It gets complicated, but the Red Sonja that's in the comics is when it was at Marvel, Conan and Red Sonja obviously crossed over constantly. But when the character eventually split off to their own license, eventually Red Sonja started to be published by Dynamite. Dark Horse had the rights to Conan. So the two characters are in the same world, but never shall they meet, kind of. And so in 2015, they had them finally team up again. The two publishers teamed up, and there was a Conan Red Sonja miniseries for the first time in, God, I want to say 15 or 16 years. And Gail was writing Red Sonja, and they asked her if she would be interested in writing it. And she said, you know, there's two main characters. It would be fun to have a co-writer. And she recommended me. And so we ended up co-writing it. Dan Panosian and Randy Green drew it. And I thought that would be my only chance to ever write Conan. And it was such a cool, fun ride. And I got to use all my old sword and sorcery lore and what I knew about Conan and all my excitement about it. And we did this miniseries, and it went well. And I thought, cool, that's a cool milestone. I got to work on one of my favorite characters. And then we get to 2019, and I'm in the Avengers office, and Tom lets me know that Conan's coming back to Marvel, and that they want him to be in this upcoming Avengers event that we were doing. And so I get to write Conan again, which is crazy fun. And Jason Aaron was going to be writing the monthly series. And I knew Jason normally would do long runs on books. He would be on a book for 4 or 5 years at least. And so I thought, oh, I won't get to touch Conan until 2030. Like, it'll never happen. And how many other people are going to want to write Conan? I'll be, you know, take a number kind of thing. And what I didn't know was Jason was only going to be on the book for a year. And so they had the main monthly book, and then they had the anthology book, Savage Sword. The original Savage Sword magazine was black and white newsprint, but they were doing a full color series with rotating creative teams. And I pitched the editor, because he was someone that I knew at Marvel, this guy, Mark Basso, who's amazing. And I pitched him a solo Conan story for the anthology, and they ended up taking it. And the timing could not have been better, because Jason's book had just launched, and because the advanced solicit cycle, they were already starting to keep their kind of, you know, eyes open for a potential second writer on Conan after Jason left. And I did this anthology story 3-parter called The Gambler with Patch Zurcher on art. Did a phenomenal job. And the rights holders of Conan loved that pitch. They loved that story. They loved the way it turned out. And so I finally kind of got on their radar, where they were like, hey, Jim's good. Like, maybe he could take over the book. And so I got to write Conan at Marvel. But my first issue literally came out weeks before lockdowns and everything. Like, it was just total mess. So I got to, you know, take over the monthly Avengers and one of my favorite characters, and almost immediately slammed into a wall, because they paused the book. Well, they had 2 issues come out, and then they paused the book for 7 months, I think. And it was just like, oh my God, what a crazy, weird way to launch this title and get it. And I'm not the new #1. I was, you know, issue 13, and like just everything that was working against us. And so I got to do Conan up through issue 25. When it came time to renew, Marvel decided not to renew, and Heroic Signatures, the rights holders for Conan, decided not to renew. And I thought, oh, that's my last chance to be a bard for the Barbarian. It'll never happen again. Like, cool experience, but not quite what you hoped. And that's just how it goes sometimes. And Fred Malmberg, who owns Conan the Barbarian, he runs the company called Heroic Signatures. He reached out and said, man, I'm sorry it didn't go the way we hoped. You know, please stay in touch. And you're like, well, that's what everyone says. Yeah. Cool. That's very professional and nice. And he contacted me months later and told me they were looking at other options, and would I be interested in potentially pitching to take over, you know, the relaunch of Conan. And I said, sure. And I knew it was going to be competitive. There were multiple writers that were pitching. I think 9 writers pitched on the new Conan at Titan. and somehow I ended up keeping the diamond. So I got to relaunch the series at Titan Comics, and that launched in late 2023, and it has been a roaring success. And that is now my main monthly output. I've been doing Conan ever since, August 2023, and I'm signed on, like I said, for 50 issues. So it's going to be the longest run of comics I've ever done now. And as of this summer, the only person who's written more Conan is Roy Thomas, and no one will ever touch him because he's done hundreds of issues. But I finally sort of sprinted into that silver position for most Conan stories.
That's awesome. And the book's good, and the artwork.
Thank you.
The artwork
is unbelievable.
Good too.
But this is true of so many of the books I've worked on. Like, without these amazing artists, I would be dead in the water. You know what I mean? Like a book like Rick and Morty Dungeons and Dragons, Troy Little is one of the best cartoonists in the business. And so when we did Avengers, you got, Sean Isaac and Pepe Larraz and Kim Jacinto and like these amazing, amazing artists, Paco Medina, like these guys made that book look beautiful, right? When I'm doing Dungeons and Dragons, Max Dunbar is one of the best fantasy artists in the entire business. And we teamed up on that book and made it a winner. And so the art team that we've got on Conan right now, we've got Roberto Dollatore and we've had Doug Braithwaite, now Fernando Dagnino, and then the event books with like Jonas Scharf or Ivan Gill. Like, these guys are all phenomenal. Every single one of them is crushing it out. Danica Breen, and like every artist that I've been able to work with on the Conan book is passionate about the material, and they know that material intrinsically, and they put their heart and soul into every page. And that's why it looks so friggin' good. Like we did that fully painted issue number 25 that came out in October. And that's a cover artist, Alex Horley, doing 34 oil painted pages for this epic King Conan story that took him almost a year to paint in between his other commitments. And it's like, there are very few characters that endear that kind of insane passion from people. Yeah. And it ignites me and ignites everyone that gets to work on the book. Every time we get to do a new issue, we're just putting our all into it. And thankfully, the readers and the reviewers and the retailers are all responding to what we're doing.
Yeah, the one issue that I remember picking up and flipping through it, I had to look at the cover again because I was like, this looks like John Buscema drew this.
Yeah. Dollatore has got this incredible ability to synthesize some of the best Conan art ever. It looks like Frazetta by way of Buscema.
Yeah.
But he lays out a page a little bit like almost like Toth or Kubert. Sometimes he's channeling bits of Hal Foster. Like, he takes these classic illustrative looks and he incorporates it all very effortlessly into his stuff. And the fandom just has responded to it in a phenomenal way. Doug Braithwaite is one of the legends of the industry. I've been a fan of his work for decades. Again, to collaborate with him and him just loving, someone who's been in this business for 30 plus years, and I send him a script and he responds and basically says, this is one of the coolest scripts I've ever, read. I can't wait to try and bring this to life. And you're like, how did I get here? Like, what an amazing, cool, ride. What a great team. What a phenomenal, group that I get to be a part of. And that's really where I'm at right now, is like every kind of week, every month is an adventure, and we're all just having the time of our lives.
It shows. So you've written Conan for a few different companies now. Is there any difference between working for the companies like
sure.
Marvel?
Well, I mean, the biggest difference now, so although Titan is publishing the comic, it's a unique opportunity because at Marvel and with Dark Horse, that was a licensed book. So what that means is that the publisher has licensed the character in the world, and it goes through that editorial process locally with that publisher. Then it goes to the rights holders. Then they give feedback. Then we do edits. So there's like multiple layers of feedback, right? The Titan deal is unique in the sense it's not a licensing deal. It's a creative publishing partnership. And so all the work gets done in-house, for lack of a better term. My boss, well, my direct superior is an editor named Chris Butera, and assistant editor, Ashley Hodgkins. But then above them is Fred Malmberg, the guy that owns Conan.
Mm-hmm.
That, and Jay Zetterberg and a couple other people, like it's like I need to convince two people of what I want to do, and they sign off on it, and then Titan publishes the book. And so there's just way less filters. Like everyone, I get to contact the people who make those decisions directly and go, here's what I think is a cool idea and why. And then they say yes or no, or hey, we need more info. And that's kind of it. And so in that way, it's a lot more frictionless. And it's not to say at Marvel was bad. I love my editor, Mark, over at Marvel. I wouldn't have these kinds of opportunities now if I hadn't done the book over at Marvel. And I learned a ton while I was doing it. But at this moment, what's great is I'm so plugged in right with the people who make those decisions and all the other related material. So I'm doing consulting on other media related to Conan. I get to see and know what the future of the character and the franchise is across all those different media platforms before they're going to get announced. And so we can synergize better, and we can come up with cooler, crazier ideas, and we can cross promote each other as well, which I think is very powerful and really fun.
So, at the beginning, you talked about how, you never really thought that you would be a writer in comics.
No.
Art and that. So as an artist, I've seen that you've done some, covers here and there. Have you ever thought about doing a book where you're doing the writing and the art on it as well?
Well, I did my webcomic back in the day that way, and I've sort of joked that my retirement plan is doing a graphic novel, like top to tail, where I would do everything. I would write it, I would draw it, I would color it, I would letter it. Like I would just do everything, and that's my whatever slow rolling retirement plan. I just sit around doing pages until it's done, and then I take it to a publisher. But in the immediate, that's probably not going to happen. First of all, because I'm not retiring, and second of all, because the time commitment is just wild. Like even if I can put out work that is of professional caliber, it's going to take me a hell of a lot longer than someone who's doing that 4, 5, 6 days a week. You know what I mean? And so I would never deign to say that I'm a monthly artist or capable of doing that at that point in time. And so I want to focus my attention and work on, I want to put out more projects rather than sort of say, okay, everything else has got to go away. I'm just doing one book that I'm writing and drawing. Because that would essentially what it would do. It would shut down everything else because I would need to give it so much time. Like Zdarsky, was drawing sex criminals, and then eventually he did that book, Public Domain. And whenever he's working on Public Domain, he's still trying to get all of his other writing done, but he's also writing and drawing and coloring this image book. And every time he does one arc of that book, it's almost killing him because it's so much extra work on his plate. And Chip is a very methodical, hardworking guy. And I look at him, and he's a friend of mine, and I'm just like, yeah, there's no way I could juggle a monthly or a regular book plus the kind of writing that I want to be doing. And so for now, the answer is no, but that doesn't mean never.
And when you're starting on a book as a writer, and they're putting the creative team together, do you get I imagine you get some say for indie stuff, but for working for Marvel, do you get a say in who?
It all depends on the editor. It depends on the project. There is no one size fits all answers. Sometimes you get brought on a project very early, and there's a lot of latitude there where you're like, I think it should look like this, and is that artist available? Or I know that artist is available because they're a friend of mine and they're looking for work, and I think they're a great fit. Other times you come into a project later and they're like, we already have so-and-so attached. You are fitting in at a different part of that schedule. And so there's no one answer to that question. I think one of the mistakes that fans have is that they think the two extremes. They think that either you're working on a Marvel book, therefore editorial tells you exactly what to do, and you have no creative latitude. You're just a robot producing material for the mouse. Or they think you can do whatever you want with the Marvel toys. You can just pull them out of the toy box and smash them all together, and no one can stop you because you're the writer. And you're like, the truth is somewhere in the middle, and it's also dependent on the project. Sometimes a project is formed by editorial. Sometimes, you're creatively pitching stuff up the ladder and you're able to get a champion and someone takes it and makes it happen. Sometimes you get a lot of latitude on who's going to be drawing it or who your collaborators are. And other times they're like, man, this thing's basically ready to go. You're the last piece of the puzzle. Let's go. And your ability to get work and to keep getting work is the flexibility that you show in terms of how you meld with those projects. Mm-hmm. That you are able to, whatever part of that process, whatever metaphor I want to use, if this is a relay race, whoever's handing you the baton, you just grab it and you run like hell. You know what I mean? Like that's the reality of it. If you're at the start of the race, great. You're at the starting blocks and the gun goes off. You got to generate the momentum. If you're midway through that process and someone's throwing the baton at you, you catch that bastard and you run as far as you can, as fast as you can, until you got to hand it off to somebody else. And your ability to do that consistently and to be flexible and to be magnanimous and to be a good communicator and a good collaborator, and hopefully, if you can manage it, a fun person to work with, will then determine whether or not you keep getting projects and how that keeps going forward. And that's the truth of creative work. That's the truth of most, interaction with human beings.
Yeah.
But creative work in particular with these companies, they're managed by people. Editorial are a group of people. Is there a nepotistic element of it in terms of friends helping friends? Sure, just like there is in any other industry. But you can also, if you screw up and if you're not capable or you're not consistent, eventually you will, sort of fade yourself out on those kinds of things. So
early on you mentioned how, you grew up liking Spider-Man and Daredevil, and you writing all these team books for Marvel.
Sure.
What characters are there that you really would like to work on that you just haven't had a chance to? Or are there any DC ones or,
I mean, absolutely. So, I've done just a handful of books at DC. Mm-hmm. So over the years, I did a Suicide Squad. I've done 2 one-shots for Suicide Squad. I did a couple Batman stories. I did a Batman Legends of the Dark Knight story, and I did one for Urban Legends, which was this alternate universe kind of Batman story. Both of them were a ton of fun to do. Obviously, the Bat family in Gotham is mythic. I would love to do more stuff in that space. I love Harley Quinn. I love Suicide Squad. I love troublemakers, any kind of troublemaking characters, whether that's Green Arrow or kind of the more innocent trouble of Shazam or things like that. Like, those are characters that come to mind and that I'd be interested in. I love the mystical and the supernatural side of things. So whether that's Dr. Fate or, Constantine or stuff like that, I know I could bring something really fun to the plate. Over in the Marvel Universe, the same kind of thing. I love the supernatural side of the Marvel Universe. So whether that's Doctor Strange or Ghost Rider or Blade, Man-Thing, or that kind of stuff. I love those kinds of characters and I love those kinds of elements, and I would dig in really hard on that. Spidey's my guy, but he's like everybody's guy. So could I do stuff with Spider-Man? I hope so, and I've done it in the past on a smaller scale. But yeah, those are the characters that sort of jump out to me. The mystical and the magical side of the Marvel and the DC universe are areas I think are really fun and well worth exploring. I can do street level stuff. I don't do as much on the cosmic kind of end of things, but that doesn't mean that I couldn't. I think that's what's fun about it is, Thunderbolts wasn't a book that I would have thought that I could do. And yet when the challenge was placed before me, I did the research and I found a fun take and I dug in on those characters. And so I try not to limit myself and just sort of say like, oh, I have to do whatever, or this is the only book that fits. Like, if someone in editorial came to me and they said, man, we think you would be a really good fit for, I don't know, just throw something, Captain Marvel. It's like, I'm curious why you think that. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Because maybe there's something there that I didn't see, and maybe I could do some exploration. I could find something. And so it's not just a matter of saying, give me Wolverine or get out of here. I think it's really a matter of looking and saying, okay, what is interesting about that character? And if there is nothing there, and I have turned down books that I didn't think I would be a good fit for, because I would rather do that than deliver, crap. So Yeah, that's kind of, there's characters I can obviously just off the top of my head, I spring out there and say, oh yeah, give me Doctor Strange, Sorcerer Supreme right here. Like I would totally rock it. But then there's other ones I would be curious to, if my name came up during a meeting, you'd be like, huh, okay, let's talk about that. That could be fun.
And are there any creators that you haven't worked with that you're like, oh, I'm dying to work
I
with?
mean,
I haven't.
there's so many artists whose work I grew up on that I would just lose my mind if I got to collaborate with them. So, I could just make a laundry list of when we did Thunderbolts 2015. One of the variant covers for my first issue was done by Arthur Adams, and that was literally because I asked. I said, "How do you guys choose variant covers?" And Alana Smith, who was the editor on the book, she was like, "Oh, we asked different artists." I said, "Is there a list you have to follow?" And they go, "Well, is there someone you want?" And I was like, "Oh, when I was a kid, Art Adams book meant it was the coolest thing ever, right?"
Oh,
like
yeah.
whether that was those X-Men annuals or Long Shot or like just the weird books he would do. I say, if we could get an Art Adams cover, like a little part of 8-year-old Jim would die. Like I would just lose it. And so they contacted Arthur and said, "Are you interested?" And he did the cover. And then through editorial, I reached out to his art agent because I thought I might buy that cover. And then I found out how much Arthur Adams sells his covers for. And I realized that is a very successful man who makes very good money doing what he does. And so I was like, well, I won't be buying that, but I'm so glad we did the cover and everything else. And this is how cool Arthur Adams is, by the way. So New York Comic Con that year, Thunderbolts came out in, I think, May. And so this is October. So we've got, I don't know, 6-7 issues out or something like that. And I'm at New York Comic Con and Arthur's there at his Artist Alley table. And I come by and I'm nervously talking to him. And at one point I mentioned I'm working for Marvel. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm doing Thunderbolts." And he goes, "Oh, that was you. I heard through my art agent that, I got that gig because you're such a fan." I said, "Well, I am." And he goes, "I'm sorry that you couldn't buy the cover." And I said, "Well, it's either that or get a down payment on a house. So I figured, why not keep that instead?" So we laughed about it or whatever. And then he digs through his files because he's got his little folders there and everything. And he pulled out the page, the layout, the little rough that he does before he does the blow up. And it's just a little piece of paper. Most of it's blue line with a little bit of pencil with the posing of the characters. And he gives it to me for nothing.
Wow.
So I have an Art Adams original, but in the most, but he didn't have to do that. Like that, what a cool dude. Like what a nice thing.
Like here's something that no one else has really seen too.
Right. And the preliminary, all the initial energy, and there's something very fun and joyous about that. And it's like I'm so thankful. I have so many pieces of artwork now from artists I've collaborated with or some I bought from artists that I've teamed up with. And like my house, just off camera here, you go out the door in the hallway, there's probably 20 pieces of page art that are up on the walls as you go down the stairs to our main floor. Oh, and they're all from books that I made, and they're with artists that I've been able to work with. Some of them are covers or splash pages or really cool moments from those series. Some of them are inks or original pencils. If you come down the stairs in my living room, there's an original oil painting, which is from my first issue of Conan the Barbarian at Marvel. I bought the cover original. This guy, Eric Gist, who's an oil painter, I didn't know that he worked in traditional oil paint. I thought he was like a digital artist because so many guys are digital. Mm-hmm. And so the cover came out for my first issue of Conan, and I was so proud of it. Oh man, I get to write Conan. And I got in touch with him and I said, "You work digital, right?" Because I thought I would like get an art print or something. And he goes, "Oh, hell no. Like I work oil on masonite, which is like really heavy artboard." Mm-hmm. And I was like, uh-oh, this is going to be the most expensive artwork I've ever bought. And I told my wife, I was like, "Look, this is sort of a milestone for me. It's a really big deal. Conan's everything." And so we worked it out, and I bought that damn painting, and it's in my living room now. And friends come over and they go, "I can't believe you have a Conan painting in your living room." And I'm like, now in particular, with the amount of Conan I've done, he's paid my mortgage, man. Like that guy deserves a shrine, a place of honor. It's very cool. So.
Yeah. Well, and you've got a great story to go along with it too. It's like, oh, right, this isn't just a Conan painting.
This is my first issue of Conan.
Yeah, like there's that that emotional connection that you have to it.
Corey Smith, who drew the last arc of Conan that I did at Marvel, I was in Atlanta this summer for Dragon Con, and we got to hang out. And at the end of the show, he asked me if I wanted a page from our run because he still had most of the pages. and he had the last page of the last issue.
Oh,
and it's
wow.
like, dude, that's the one I want. Like that's the milestone. That was when I thought I would never write Conan again. And you got that page. So he gifted me that, and I got it framed, and it's literally in the hallway here. And now I look at it with such a different point of view, because it wasn't my last issue of Conan. It was just the end of that era.
Yeah.
And the, projecting forward to another one I had no way of knowing was coming, right?
It's the end of the beginning.
Yeah, right? That's what's so cool about it. And so for me, it's like I said before, all this stuff's time capsule stuff. Like, we brought back Savage Sword magazine, black and white, at Titan on the 50th anniversary of Savage Sword #1 from Marvel. And we contacted Joe Gisco, who used to do, phenomenal covers for Conan all the time. He hadn't done a Conan cover in like 25 years, and we got him to do a brand new one for the new series. And then I got to write a short story based on that cover that he put together. And again, man, I get my complimentary copies. Also, I'll never own a Gisco original. That's insane. But I got my complimentary copies. They send the box of them in the mail or whatever. And I open that box up, and it's like a time capsule with my name on it. Like, it's like the past and the present. Like, I see that book, and it has such good memories for me of growing up reading those books. But it's brand new, and my name's on the front cover with everybody else. And that's like mythic. Like, it's weird and cool and amazing at the same time.
So, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, meeting Art Adams at the convention, like all creators. I know you do conventions. Do you have any conventions this year booked?
Yeah, I've got quite a few. I've already done 2 this year. Normally I don't start doing conventions until March. But this year, for whatever reason, January and February, I did Portland, and then I just got back from Vancouver a week ago. But I've got 2 in March. So I've got Seattle Emerald City Comic-Con, which is always one of my favorite shows every single year. I have such good memories of Seattle. I have so many great friendships from that show. I have launched books at that show, and it's changed the course of my career. Like, it's really special. And it seems like that show, because it's March, people are kind of coming out of the winter blahs, and they're excited about comics. And all the professionals who, by the time we hit October, November, are just exhausted and sick of people, they got their mojo back, and they're like excited to do cons again. So like, the energy on that show feels electric. You come to that show and it's like, comics kick ass. Let's go. And if that show's strong, I feel like it propels me through deep into the summer. Do you know what I mean? And so, I did MegaCon last year in Orlando, and it was awesome. And so I'm back in Orlando this year as well. So I'm doing MegaCon Orlando. That show is huge. There's tons and tons of creators, and there's tons of comic fans. I hadn't been in the South or Florida in so long. And last year was like electric. Like, it was really, really fun. I had one of my most fun interactions with a retailer when I was there. That's where I ended up buying this guy right here. That's an original Conan #1 from 1970. Wow. That's not a reprint. That's not a facsimile. That's the real deal.
That's a nice looking copy.
And it's a good white pages, good looking copy. What happened was, I've been looking for a nice looking copy, but I didn't want to get a CGC 9.0 or whatever. I just wanted like a nice raw book, because the Conans tend to be like either pristine and they're thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, or they look like they've been run over by a truck. And I was like, I don't want either of those. I just want like a nice book. And I walked by this one retailer, and he had this guy right there. And I looked at it, and I was like, dude, that's a nice looking Conan. Can I look closer at it? And he pulls it off the rack, and I'm looking at it. And he says to me, he goes, man, if you'd have bought this like 2 years ago, you probably could have got it for half the price, but Conan's hot shit again. And I was laughing. And my name is on my badge, and he glances down at my badge, and he goes, oh, and it's all your fault. And I was like, oh, what a cool compliment. And so we had a wonderful conversation, and I signed some Conan comics that he had brought from his poll customers that he had been saving for me to sign the next day anyways. And then he cut me an amazing deal on this thing. And so I just keep it right there as a nice little memento from that show last year, And so again, it's like, not only do I get to do the convention, not only do I get to interact with people and feed off of that excitement and our shared love of the character. But now I got a cool story, and I got one of the originals, which is really sweet. So, yeah.
And anybody that wants to check out your news, your conventions, check out his website.
That's right. Yeah, I've got everything listed there. Every book I've ever worked on is listed there. My entire career is sort of built there. I've got tutorials on how to write comic books, how to work with artists, how to work with editors, how publishing works. Things that I wish I had known when I was starting out my career. I've sort of recorded all that there, so people have that as a resource as well.
Yeah, I've looked over the site. It's really cool.
Oh, thank you.
So you obviously, Conan still going strong. Yeah. Is there anything else that you have coming up that we need to be keeping an eye out for?
Yeah, unfortunately, stuff hasn't been announced yet. So I've got another book I'm working on that's a commercial book that's going to be announced pretty soon. And I think it's launching either July or August. And then I've got a creator-owned book, like I said before, it's going to launch this fall probably. We're just sort of getting into production on it now. And so in the next, hopefully, month or so, I'll be able to start tightening all that down and make more announcements. But I've got more comics on the go. I love Conan, but it's not the sum total of everything I'm doing. My wife and I also do a series of books for Random House called the Dungeons & Dragons Young Adventurers Guides. And so we're going to be promoting those. We've got new volumes of those that are going to be coming out in the next year or two as well. So yeah, lots of fun stuff I get to work on. It's always a joy.
Nice. Well, thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with me today. It was
no problem.
It was such a good time. And, I know you listed a couple cons, but, the local con for me is Baltimore Comic Con. So,
sweet.
For you to make
I haven't committed my September yet, so it's entirely possible. I haven't been to Baltimore. It must have been at least a decade. So I would love to make it back. I've heard it's a very good comic show. It was great when I last went. So it would be really cool to go again for sure.
That's one of the conventions that we always tell people, if you are into comics, because if you're into it because you want to see, the movies and the shows, okay, fine. There's other cons for that. But if you're into it for the creators and the comics, Baltimore is one of the top ones to go to.
Cool. Well, I definitely got to keep it on my radar then. So yeah, I've got, I'll be at, I always do the Calgary Expo. I'm always in Toronto because that's my hometown. Obviously, a lot of the Canadian shows where I can make it. I was hoping to make it to C2E2 this year, but it's got a conflict with another creative project that I'm working on. So I'm not able to make it, unfortunately, this time. But then I've got, I'll be announcing my free comic book day appearance because we're doing a free comic book day Conan book, just like we have for the last 2 years. Other cool stuff, in the hopper. So all kinds of fun things coming down the pipe.
Awesome. Well, it's been great talking with you. I wish you nothing but success going forward, and very excited to see the new stuff when it gets announced.
Thank you very much, man. I really appreciate it.
All right. And thank you everyone for watching this. And until next time, catch you by the spinner rack.